Hello, everybody. I am super excited to be here today to talk about employability skills in the 21st century. My name is Leah Jewell. I am the Managing Director for Employability Solutions at Pearson. And I thought I would spend a little bit of time sharing with you some of the research that we've done over the last several months that talk a little bit about the jobs for 2030 and the skills that you're going to need for the future. Talk a little bit about the segments of the population and what the learners are, who's out there, how do they learn, what do they care about, what are their outcomes, and then share a few recommendations specifically for employers that I hope everybody will take me up on by the end of the conversation today. So I'm sure it doesn't come as any surprise to anybody in this room that anytime you think about what's going to happen in the next 10 to 15 years, there's a lot of uncertainty. We don't really know. We can't predict the future. And especially when you start to think about what are the jobs going to be and what are the skills that are going to be needed. We know that right now we're at an all-time low in terms of the unemployment rate. And we know that even with that there are still employers who are having trouble finding people for the jobs that they've got out there today. People are still struggling to get jobs because they don't necessarily have the skills that they want. And what's interesting underneath all of that labor data is that we're still seeing some interesting trends, which is there's an all-time low for labor force participation, especially with men 16 to 25 years old, which I don't think we have a lot of explanation for why that's happening. And I can tell you that my own 17-year-old son is on the fast track to be in that category, but that's a whole nother story. And he's going to be really pissed that I just said that in front of a bunch of people. But so there's a lot of conversation out there about how technology is going to change all of the jobs, and the robots are coming to take our jobs, and we're not going to have any jobs. And at Pearson, we worked with Oxford Martin and Nesta to do some research, and we thought maybe the question isn't about what are the jobs that are going to go away, but actually what are the jobs that are going to exist, and what are the skills that you're going to need to actually survive and function well in those jobs in the future. So we thought, what if somebody's entering kindergarten today? What are the skills that they're going to need to know when they get to the year 2030 and they start to enter the workforce? So that was sort of what we took a look at. And we knew that it wasn't just about technology. Technology is going to be a huge factor, but there are a bunch of other global factors that are going to impact people in the workforce. And here are all of the factors that we took into account when we did this research. Everything from technological change to globalization to demographics, environmental sustainability, urbanization, inequality, political uncertainty. All of these things together come together and will all impact not only what jobs are going to be out there, but the skills that people are going to need and how that's going to look different depending on where you are throughout the globe. I'm going to jump to the end here and tell you a little bit about just the general occupational areas that are going to be in the highest demand. And you'll see the things at the top: management, computer science, engineering, education, arts, media, healthcare. Maybe not huge surprises to you. But what's interesting is it's almost even less about the occupations, and I can tell you it's really not about the job titles. It's actually about the underlying skills be underneath the job titles that we really need to take a look at and pay attention to. For example, it may surprise you to know that one of the top 10 highest growth occupations that we predict for the future is librarian. And certainly not the way I think about a librarian or the librarians that I'm used to working with, but if you think about not the job title of librarian, but what librarians do, which is help people find information, analyze information, search for information, those underlying skills, that skill set is what's actually going to be in huge demand. So the title of librarian may not actually be the job title going forward, and that's why job titles can be very misleading, but actually the skills that the librarians have are going to be in very much high demand. These happen to be, after all of the research that was done, these were the top 10 skills as they correlated to jobs that are out there today for the US, and you'll see an interesting mix of skills and knowledge and learning. Everything from psychology to sociology and anthropology to skills that are like fine-tuned soft skills, originality, fluency of ideas, active learning. So it really started to dig deeper into what's going to matter. And I think one of the themes here is that what's really going to be important are that knowledge and those skills that are uniquely human. Those are the skills that are going to enable us to work with and alongside the technology as we go forward, as opposed to being replaced by the technology. Also interesting to note, if you go to the research, this list looks a little bit different if you're in the UK. So it's not necessarily the exact same list depending on where you are in the globe. Some of the big themes out of this research is that you need a mix of knowledge and skills. Those two things together are going to be very important. You're probably going to have at least 6 to 7 jobs. I actually think this is probably underestimating the number of jobs that people are going to have throughout their life. There's a lot of studies right now that say that the people that are born today are going to live to be 150 years old. 150 years old. If you think you might spend maybe 20 years in school, another 20, 30 years in retirement, that is 100 freaking years in the job. 100. And I got to tell you, I, for one, am psyched that I am way past that curve, and I am not going to be in the job for 100 years. But if you are in a job, if you are in the workforce for 100 years, that college degree, that high school degree, that is not going to be enough. You're going to need to learn throughout the whole time that you're in the workforce. You better know how to learn, because you're going to be doing it for 100 freaking years. It just scares me every time I say that. But now you know what the skills are, and you know what sort of the prediction is around the skills for the future. That's one part of the equation. We think the other part of the equation is, what do the learners look like? Who are they? What are their outcomes? What do they care about? So we conducted a new set of research that we just released in the last few weeks that sort of breaks the learners down into segments. And just to give you a high-level sense of it, we're talking about at least there are 70 million workers in the US today who are employed without a high school diploma or a GED, or with some college experience but no college degree. 70 million, just to give you a sense of sort of the scope, which I'm sure most of you are pretty familiar with. And these are how the segments sort of broke down for us when we surveyed thousands of students, and not just students, I mean people from age 15 to age 60. This is how it started to break down. You see, we've got the skeptical learner, the reluctant learner, the hobby learner, the career learner, and the traditional learner. Some of these may sound familiar, and you might even be able to imagine what the characteristics are. But if you go to the right, you've got the career learner and the traditional learner. These are people that value more formal education. The people on the left are the ones that value formal education to a much lesser degree. And at the top of the grid, the career learners and the skeptical learners, these are the people who prefer digital learning. And then you get down to the bottom, and these are the people that prefer a more traditional type of learning. We'll talk a little bit about that. And I just think it's sort of interesting to see, because if you know who these learners are, then you can start to actually build programs that address what they care about. I'm not going to dig into all of these, but let me tell you a little bit about 2 of them. The biggest group here is the hobby learner. So the hobby learner is interesting because, first off, this is primarily people who are very passionate about learning, and they prefer to do it in very self-directed ways. This is also made up of a group of people who are actually mostly retired and who have been in the workforce, and maybe some people have, these people have college degrees. So they like very traditional learning. They don't want to take a lot of online classes. They'd rather be in a face-to-face sort of classroom experience, and they really like the much more traditional modes. They see that there's promise in technology, but they really don't spend a lot of time learning on different technological devices. They much prefer the traditional stuff, and they're going to learn for the sake of learning. That's the #1 goal for them. It's really not about anything else. So let's take a look at the career learner. I think the career learner is interesting. These are people who are also very passionate about learning, but not for the love of learning. They are passionate because they want to learn the skill that's going to get them the job or the promotion or help them stay in the workforce. So they're very, very focused about what they care about. This is a group of people generally around the ages around 25 to 40 is where a lot of these people sit. And they also tend to really like technology. So it's interesting that in the hobby learners, almost none of them go to YouTube. Here, you double the number of the percentage of people who learn almost exclusively from YouTube, and that's what they really care about. And they will really heavily leverage their electronic devices, whether it's a phone or whether it's a tablet, in addition to a computer. So they're really learning in very different ways, and they have very different outcomes associated with the learning that they care about. So now I just wanted to sort of, if you have all of this in your head, you've got sort of this idea of the skills, you've got an idea of the types of learners, and this is a group of, this room is filled with employers, and so I feel obligated to sort of share with you my passionate plea for a few things that I would love to see employers do more of to help us with this. The good news is that actually a lot of people realize that they need to upskill and reskill. So they're not oblivious to this, right? Most people understand that they need to do more than what they're doing today. And the research that we've done, easy 70% of the people know they've got to go back to school or get some additional type of upskilling or reskilling. They have a strong intention to enroll in something. They have a desire to do this. And the things that get in the way for them are money and money. Probably time too, but sort of money shows up a lot of times at the top of the list. And so anything that we can do to help that, I think, is going to really play out well for people. Again, probably not a lot of a surprise for anybody in this room. The first thing that I think is really, really critical is if employers can actually map their job descriptions to skills, literally go down to that level, that is the center of gravity, in my opinion, from which all other things start to really happen. Because I don't know about you, but the job descriptions I've seen and I've been exposed to, they're pretty general. They're sometimes overinflated. They throw some skills in which may or may not actually be the actual skills that people use to actually do the job. The more employers can actually do that sort of analysis and really dig in at the skills level and start to communicate those skills both internally and externally, there's huge power in that. There's power in that for the employee because they can see the transparency around the progression and the learning and the training that they need to do. There's power for the candidates who are applying and the supply side of the equation because now they know, what do I need to do to go get that job? And by the way, that then tends to open up different kinds of pathways for people because it may be a degree, but there may be another faster, cheaper way to get the skills that somebody wants for the job. And if you think that these people are going to be learning for the rest of their lives 100 years, then you know that it's not necessarily about a start and an end point with a degree. So if you've got these alternative pathways and you can start to build on them over the course of a lifetime, there's a lot of power there. But that really only happens if you've got the skills that are mapped, right? And then if you do that, it also really empowers the schools and the academic system to actually start to look at the programs that they've got, build out different types of pathways. It enables alternative providers to really play effectively in this ecosystem. And it all comes down to mapping the jobs to the skills. The people that have done this have really seen a big payoff. The other suggestion that I would have revolves around tuition assistance. 80% of the companies that are out there in the United States offer some form of tuition assistance, but I'm sure it would shock you to know that only 3% of the employees actually take advantage of that benefit. I mean, that's really crazy in my opinion. And part of the reason why, maybe not the only reason why, is that those benefits generally do not cover the full cost of training or a formal degree. And when we already talked about money being an issue, that shows up here, right? So there's a lot to unpack here, and I'm not going to do that right now, but I really want to encourage people to take a look at how are you measuring the outcomes from your tuition reimbursement? Do you have the program that's set up? Is it funding enough? Is it funding alternative pathways? We heard from the people at McDonald's, and they've really done a fantastic job with their program. The more people who could look to models like that at all levels, the better off people are going to be, and that's what's going to fuel the lifelong learning, I think, for people as well, because they need the money, and a lot of that's going to come from the benefit from the employer. And then finally, my last plea, there's always a lot of talk around work-based learning, and I'm a huge fan of work-based learning, whether that's apprenticeships, whether that's internships. I'm going to sort of put a big push out there for virtual internships and virtual project-based internships. We've done some research here, and we know that, first off, that the supply of internships is not enough to fulfill the demand for internships, right? The other thing is that you really are limited in terms of who you can get in an internship program and even an apprenticeship program and when you can get them. And if you start to take this virtually, this is what the students told us. 73% of them said that they would be extremely, not like a little interested, extremely interested. And they like it because it gives them the opportunity to work with flexible hours. There's no relocation needed. They can connect with mentors, and they can do it over the course of the year. So they aren't just restricted from the time that they're not in school, right? And if I'm an employer, I actually open up my talent pool and application pool to a much wider audience. I now actually get a more diverse pool of candidates that I get to work with, and I get to work with them over the course of the year. So the project may be a month, it may be 6 months, it may be a year. That's dependent on all the projects that you have. But you have so much more flexibility in a virtual environment than you often do in a face-to-face, and there's a huge benefit to that for both the school, the student, and the employer. So thank you guys so much for letting me sort of pitch those ideas to you, and I'm really excited about the opportunity that's in front of everybody here, because if there's one thing that's really clear to me, it's that employers are really, really going to change the education game, and you're going to be the people that are going to inform what's going to happen, you're going to help us build what's going to happen, you're going to endorse it, and then you're going to be the big payoff on the back end for all of the work that you guys are doing. So thank you so much for your time.